This is my true story. I worked my whole life to raise my daughters, thinking in my old age I would be treated with love. But one day, my own daughter looked me in the eye and said, "Don't touch my baby. You smell so bad." Those words cut me deeper than any wound. I had sacrificed everything for her, and in return, she gave me humiliation. But what she didn't know was that I still controlled everything she thought she would one day own. And you won't believe what I did next. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. I spent my whole life working, and I mean working hard, to give my daughters a better life than I ever had. I came from nothing. My own father had nothing to give me, and when I was young, I promised myself that my children would never feel that same hunger or fear. For decades, I woke up before sunrise and went to the factory, breaking my back day after day, saving every penny I could. I paid for their school fees, even when it meant I had to eat less. I paid for their clothes, their books, their trips. I watched them grow, and it made every sacrifice worth it. When they were older, I paid for their college. I didn't just give them shelter, I gave them opportunity. I wanted them to walk into classrooms with their heads high, never feeling ashamed of where they came from. I worked nights too, just to cover tuition. I remember falling asleep on buses, my hands rough from work, but smiling because I knew my daughters were building futures. That was my devotion, to give them what I never had, and to make sure they never had to beg or bow. When they married, I was there. I helped with the weddings, I helped with the homes, I even helped buy furniture. Every milestone in their lives carried a piece of me. Their dresses, their photographs, the very roofs over their heads. My hands and my sweat were behind it all. When one of them struggled to pay bills, I stepped in. When the other wanted to move to a bigger place, I stepped in again. My devotion did not stop when they grew older. It only grew stronger. And when the first one told me she was going to be a mother, I cried tears of joy. Becoming a grandfather was the dream I had carried inside my chest for years. I imagined holding that baby in my arms, feeling its little hands, hearing its little breaths. I imagined rocking the child to sleep, telling stories, passing on pieces of myself. That baby was not just my daughter's child. It was my chance to love again, my chance to live again. I bought clothes, tiny ones, long before the birth. I bought toys. I even carved a wooden rattle by hand, just like my father had once carved for me. Every day I thought of that baby. Every day I dreamed of the moment I would finally hold it. Through all this, my devotion never wavered. Even when I was old and my body was weak, I still found ways to give. I gave money when I should have been saving. I gave time when I should have been resting. I gave love when I had little left to spare. I never once thought of myself. My whole life was about them. My whole identity was built on being their father, their provider, their protector. I thought this love would come back to me in my final years. I thought they would see the years of labor, the nights of hunger, the countless sacrifices. I thought they would look at me and feel pride, respect, gratitude. I thought my daughter, holding her baby, would look at me and remember the man who carried her, fed her, clothed her. But devotion, I learned, does not guarantee love in return. Sometimes devotion only feeds arrogance. Sometimes it makes people believe they deserve everything without giving anything back. I was blind to that truth for too long. I kept telling myself, they are my daughters. Blood will never turn against me. I kept believing my devotion had meaning. But deep down, the cracks had already started. My devotion was never seen as sacrifice. It was seen as duty. To them, it was never love freely given. It was something I owed, and they believed it would never end. That was my devotion, endless, complete, and given without question. But devotion can become a weapon when it is met with cruelty. And I was about to learn that in the hardest way. It began slowly, almost too quietly to notice at first. After my daughter got married, her warmth toward me started to fade. At the beginning, I told myself it was normal. She was starting her new life, she was busy, she had her own family now. I gave her space, thinking it would bring us closer later. But instead of closeness, I felt distance. The phone calls that used to come often started to disappear. Where once she called just to ask how I was, now days and weeks went by with silence. If I dialed her number, sometimes she answered, sometimes she didn't. And when she did answer, her tone felt rushed, distracted, like my voice was an interruption to her day. She would cut the calls short, saying she was busy, saying the baby was crying, saying she had things to do. I would hang up the phone and sit in my chair, staring at the wall, feeling like I had become nothing more than a burden, even through a telephone line. Visits became awkward too. When I stopped by her home, she no longer welcomed me with a smile. Instead, her words carried a weight, as though my presence was an inconvenience. I could see it in her eyes, the way she sighed when I sat down, the way she avoided asking me if I wanted tea or food. I used to be the man she ran to, the man she trusted, the man she leaned on. Now I felt like an outsider, unwelcome in the very home I had helped her build. The little things hurt the most. When I tried to talk, she often cut me off mid-sentence. Stories from my past, stories about her childhood, about her late mother, things I thought she would cherish, were met with rolled eyes. Sometimes she said, "Dad, that's boring. We've heard it before." And her children, my grandchildren, began to mimic her tone. They laughed when I spoke slowly. They whispered to each other when I told them about the old days. I sat there, still smiling on the outside, but inside, my heart cracked each time. Her kindness disappeared bit by bit, like water slipping through my fingers. She began complaining about me in small ways, about how much space I used, about how often I asked for medicine, about how much food I ate. The daughter who once sat in my lap and begged me for one more bedtime story now sighed when I asked if there was bread left in the kitchen. I thought, she is tired, she is stressed, she is a mother now. I excused her behavior, telling myself it was just the weight of responsibility. But with each visit, each word, each look, the coldness grew. It was like a slow winter creeping into my life, freezing the warmth I once knew. And though my devotion had not changed, hers had. I ignored the sting at first, convincing myself love would return if I was patient. But deep down, I began to feel something I never thought I would feel from my own blood. Distance, rejection, and disrespect. That was the first sign. Small, sharp, but undeniable. My daughter no longer saw me as her father, the man who gave her everything. She began to see me as an old man, an inconvenience, someone who did not belong. And though I stayed quiet, though I swallowed the hurt, I knew in my heart that something was breaking between us, something that might never be fixed. The day I will never forget came on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I had been invited to see my daughter's baby properly for the first time. My heart was pounding with excitement as I left my small home. I carried a gift bag filled with baby clothes, soft ones I had bought weeks earlier, and inside the bag, I placed a small wooden toy I had made with my own hands. I had worked on that toy for nights, smoothing the edges, painting it carefully, imagining the small hands that would one day hold it. When I reached her house, I stood at the door with a smile. She opened it and let me in, though her face carried no joy. I ignored it. I told myself she must be tired. Babies cry, nights are long, mothers need rest. I did not want to think the coldness in her face was for me. Inside, the house was filled with the quiet sounds of a newborn, soft breaths, little cries. My heart swelled. I sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching the gift bag, waiting for the moment I had dreamed of for months. She came into the room holding her baby. My eyes filled with tears. That was my grandchild, my blood, the next part of me living in this world. I reached out my arms slowly, carefully, with all the gentleness of an old man who had held babies before, who knew the fragile weight of new life. But instead of stepping forward, she stepped back. She pulled the baby closer to her chest, her eyes hard, her lips twisted in disgust. Then she said the words that cut through me like a knife. "Don't touch my baby. You smell." For a moment, I did not understand. My hands were still out, hanging in the air, trembling. Her words echoed in my ears, louder and louder, like a cruel bell that would not stop ringing. "You smell." That was what she saw when she looked at me. Not her father, not the man who gave her life, who carried her through hunger, who bought her wedding dress, who built her home. Just an old man with a smell. The room went silent. Even her husband froze. He did not defend me. He did not say a word. He just looked away, his face blank, as if he agreed but did not want to speak it aloud. My gift bag slipped slightly from my lap, and I quickly placed it on the table before it fell. The clothes, the toy, the love inside that bag suddenly felt useless. I sat back, my arms heavy, my chest hollow. My daughter turned away from me and began rocking her baby, pretending I was no longer there. The world around me blurred. My pride, my devotion, my joy at becoming a grandfather shattered in one breath, in one sentence. I had dreamed of this day, and instead, I was humiliated. I looked around the room, the home I had helped pay for, the furniture I had helped buy, and I felt like a stranger inside it. I said nothing. My throat was tight, my voice trapped. If I had tried to speak, I would have broken. So instead, I stayed silent. I stood slowly, left the gift bag on the table, and walked toward the door. My steps were heavy, but I kept my back straight. I would not let her see me bend. I opened the door quietly, stepped outside, and left the house without a goodbye. Inside, I was crumbling. Her words kept replaying in my head. "Don't touch my baby. You smell." They echoed with every step I took toward my car. That day, I realized my daughter no longer saw me as her father. She saw me as a burden, an embarrassment, someone unworthy even of holding her child. And though I said nothing, though I walked away calmly, a storm had begun to grow inside me, one that would soon change everything. When she said those words, the air in the room grew so heavy I could hardly breathe. My hands were still raised, reaching for a child I would never be allowed to hold. But now they hung useless in the air, trembling before I finally pulled them back. My arms felt hollow, like they no longer belonged to me. I looked at my daughter, the baby in her arms, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger to my own blood. The silence in the room made it worse. Her husband said nothing. He could have spoken, even a small word, but he just lowered his eyes and stared at the floor. That silence told me more than words ever could. No one in that room would stand for me. I was alone, completely alone, in front of the very people who should have been my family. I set the gift bag down gently on the table, making sure it didn't fall. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to hold the edge of the table for a moment. Inside that bag were the little clothes I had bought, folded carefully. Inside that bag was the toy I had made with my own hands. Inside that bag was love. And now it sat there, unwanted, ignored, just like me. I tried to keep my face calm. I forced my lips into something that looked like a faint smile, though inside I was breaking apart. My daughter turned her back to me, holding her baby close, rocking it gently, as if I no longer existed. She had erased me from that moment, erased me from her family. The humiliation burned hotter than any fire. My legs felt weak as I stood, but I made myself move slowly, with dignity. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. Each step toward the door was heavier than the last, but I forced myself forward. My chest felt like it was being crushed, and still I kept my back straight. If I had spoken, if I had let out even one word, I would have crumbled into pieces right there on the floor. I walked out quietly, but inside, my heart screamed. The man who had worked his whole life, the man who had sacrificed meals, sleep, and comfort so his children could live better, had just been told by his own flesh and blood that he was not worthy to hold his grandchild, because he smelled. That word cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. It was not just an insult. It was a declaration. To her, I was no longer her father. I was just an old man, an inconvenience, someone she could push aside with a cruel word. And in front of her husband, in front of her child, she stripped me of my dignity. I reached my car and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. My reflection in the window looked older, weaker, smaller than I had ever seen myself. For the first time, I felt the full weight of humiliation. Not private humiliation, but public. The kind that leaves scars so deep they never fade. I started the car, but I didn't drive right away. I sat there in silence, staring at the empty seat beside me, imagining the baby that should have been there, wrapped in a blanket, sleeping in my arms. That picture was gone now, replaced by the memory of my daughter's words, sharp and cold. That night, I did not sleep. Her voice echoed in my ears. "Don't touch my baby. You smell." Over and over again, until I thought I would lose my mind. But I did not cry. Tears would have been a kindness to myself, and I refused to give myself that kindness. Instead, I sat in silence, letting the humiliation carve itself deep into my bones. It was in that silence that something inside me shifted. Humiliation had been forced upon me, but it planted something else in its place. Resolve. She thought she had broken me with her cruelty. She thought those words would fade like smoke, but she was wrong. What she gave me that day was not shame. It was a reason to take back the power she thought she had stolen. A reason to remind her that the man she dismissed as smelling old still held her future in his hands. That day was the beginning. She humiliated me in public, but soon I would humiliate her in silence, and my silence would take everything she thought was hers. That night, after leaving her house, I did not go straight to bed. I sat in my car for a long time, parked outside my own small place, staring at the empty seat next to me. In my mind, I kept seeing what could have been. My grandchild resting in my arms, smiling as I whispered the same lullabies I once sang to my daughter. But reality had burned that picture away. What I had instead was her voice, sharp and cold, echoing in my ears. "Don't touch my baby. You smell." I closed my eyes and leaned back in the seat, and memories came rushing in. I remembered the nights when she was a child, sick with fever, and I stayed awake by her bedside, changing cool cloths, praying silently for her to get better. I remembered the mornings I walked to work in the snow with holes in my shoes so she could eat breakfast before school. I remembered skipping meals so she could have enough. Every sacrifice I had made for her came back to me that night, and each memory felt like another knife twisting deeper. I thought of the diapers I had changed, the homework I had helped with, the birthdays I had saved up for just to buy her a cake and a small gift. I thought of the pride I felt watching her graduate, the tears in my eyes as I walked her down the aisle at her wedding, the money I spent making sure her day was beautiful. And I thought of the housewarming gift I gave her when she first moved into her home, telling her, "This is so you'll always feel safe." Every single moment of devotion, every single sacrifice came back that night, and then I thought of how quickly it had been erased with one sentence. She hadn't said it in anger. That was what hurt most. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't lost control. She had said it calmly, almost casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. To her, I wasn't her father anymore. I was just an old man who didn't belong near her child. And that meant every sacrifice I had made, every hour of labor, every dream I had carried for her, meant nothing to her now. I sat there in silence, but my silence was not weakness. My silence was weight, heavy, solid. It pressed down on me until it reshaped my thoughts. I realized something in that moment. Love given freely can be taken for granted, but respect must be demanded. She had taken my love all her life, and now she had stripped me of respect in front of others. But I still had something she did not realize: power. Because while she looked at me and saw only age, weakness, and smell, she forgot what still rested in my name. She forgot who had paid for the education, the weddings, the homes. She forgot that the estate she assumed would one day belong to her was still entirely mine. Legally, financially, completely mine. She thought time had already handed her my legacy, but she was wrong. And as I sat in the darkness of my car, humiliation began to turn into something else: resolve. I whispered to myself, this was the last insult. I would not allow another one. I had swallowed her coldness for months. I had ignored her dismissive looks, her cutting words, the way she rolled her eyes when I spoke. But this, telling me I was unworthy to hold my own grandchild, this was the line. And I knew in that moment that my silence would not be empty. It would be sharp. It would be final. I decided then that I would act. Not with anger, not with shouting, not with violence. I would act with paper, with signatures, with silence. I would act in the way that would hurt her most, not by raising my voice, but by removing her from the future she assumed was hers. That night, I did not cry. I did not rage. I sat still, quiet, calm, and certain. She had taken my dignity in front of her family, but I would take something far greater from her: the very legacy she thought was guaranteed. My reflection in the car window no longer looked weak. It looked resolved. And in that silence, in that reflection, I finally understood something. Sometimes revenge is not about loud acts or sharp words. Sometimes revenge is as simple as a signature, as quiet as walking away, as permanent as erasing a name from a will. For years, I had worked, saved, and built piece by piece what would one day be called my estate. It was not given to me. I earned it with sweat, long hours, and sacrifices that stripped years from my life. Every dollar was a dollar I bled for. And because I had always been a father first, I put everything in order so my daughters would never struggle the way I had struggled. I had land, savings, investments, and a home. Altogether, it was worth about $1.2 million. That was not just money to me. It was my life's work. It was the proof that all those years of pain had meant something. It was supposed to be my gift to my children, the final way of saying, I loved you with everything I had. In my will, my older daughter, the one who humiliated me, was listed as the primary heir. She would have received the bulk of the estate, the house, the money, the securities. Her sister was also included, but in smaller portions. I thought that was fair at the time. After all, the older daughter had children, a family to take care of. I assumed she would need more. I thought I was being wise, generous, and thoughtful. I thought I was doing what a father should do. But as I sat alone after that day, hearing her words replay in my mind, "Don't touch my baby, you smell," I realized something I had never let myself think before. What if she did not deserve it? What if all my sacrifices were nothing but fuel for her arrogance? What if, by giving her everything, I was only rewarding her cruelty? The thought stung like fire, but it was the truth I could no longer deny. She assumed everything was already hers. She lived as if my estate was guaranteed, as if my name on those documents no longer mattered. In her mind, time had already delivered my legacy into her hands. She boasted about it casually at family dinners, saying things like, "When Dad passes, this will be ours." I used to smile and stay quiet, never correcting her, but now I saw those words for what they really were: entitlement, greed, and a lack of respect. She believed she owned me already, body and soul. But she had forgotten the most important detail. Legally, everything was still mine. Every asset, every account, every piece of land and property. It was all under my name, under my control. A will is not a gift until the day comes, and until that day, I had the right to change it. That power, that quiet truth, was the only thing she had overlooked. She looked at me and saw weakness, age, and uselessness. But what she didn't see was the weight of the pen I still carried. A single signature could erase her name completely. And so, as I sat reflecting on my humiliation, I realized I did not have to raise my voice or beg for her respect. I did not have to argue, fight, or try to explain myself to someone who had already decided I was beneath her. No, I had something much stronger than words. I had control. She thought my devotion made me powerless, but it was my devotion that built the very wealth she took for granted, and it was still mine to take back. That night, I decided the estate would no longer be hers. She had chosen to strip me of my dignity in front of her family, so I would strip her of the future she thought belonged to her. Her sister, the one who still respected me, who still welcomed me with warmth, would be the one to inherit. My estate, my legacy, my life's work would go into hands that valued it. My older daughter would get nothing, not a house, not a dollar, not even a piece of furniture. The more I thought about it, the calmer I became. The decision was not born out of rage. It was not a sudden act of anger. It was cold, steady, and clear. It was justice. My estate was never a promise. It was a gift. And gifts are given to those who show respect, not to those who spit cruelty into the face of the giver. That realization gave me strength I had not felt in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. She thought her words had crushed me. But in truth, they had awakened something she had forgotten. I was still her father, and I still held the power to decide her future. And with that power, I would do what she never expected. I would erase her completely. The next morning, I woke with no hesitation. I had not slept much, but my decision was clear. The first thing I did after making my tea was pick up the phone and call my lawyer. He had been with me for years, helping me manage small matters with my estate, updating documents when needed, advising me on taxes and property. When he answered, his voice calm as always, I simply said, "I need to change my will. Today." He paused for a second, maybe surprised by the urgency, but then said, "Come in at noon. Bring your papers." That was all I needed to hear. I gathered my documents carefully. The deeds, the bank statements, the insurance papers, the old will. Every page reminded me of the years of labor that built those numbers, those signatures, that wealth. I placed them in a folder, slid it into a worn leather briefcase I had carried for decades, and sat by the window until it was time to leave. The morning light streamed in, and for once I felt no heaviness, only resolve. At noon, I walked into the lawyer's office. The waiting room was quiet, the hum of a ceiling fan above me, the smell of coffee faint in the air. My lawyer came out, shook my hand, and led me into his office. We sat across from each other, a large wooden desk between us, the same desk where I had once signed the first draft of my will years ago. Back then, I had written her name proudly at the top, believing she would honor me. Now, I was here to erase it. "I want to make a change," I told him. "Remove my older daughter's name completely. She gets nothing." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Are you sure?" he asked. His voice was steady, but I could hear the weight in the question. Changing a will is not something taken lightly. It is final, binding. He wanted me to be certain. I looked him in the eye and said, "Yes, I am sure. Give everything to her sister instead. The house, the money, the properties. She has treated me with respect. She deserves it. The other one does not." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right. We can do that today." He pulled out fresh papers, set them on the desk, and began writing. I watched as he crossed out the old names and filled in the new ones. With each stroke of his pen, I felt lighter. It was as if the burden I had carried since that night at her house was slowly being lifted, one line at a time. When the new will was complete, he slid it across the desk to me. "Read it carefully," he said. I read every word. Her name was gone. The estate, all $1.2 million of it, now belonged to her sister. My signature would make it law. I held the pen for a long moment, thinking of everything that had brought me here. The sacrifices, the humiliation, the betrayal. Then I pressed the pen to the paper and signed. The sound of my pen scratching across the page felt like thunder in my ears. It was not just ink. It was justice. It was dignity. It was the act of a man who had been humiliated but refused to die with that humiliation still burning inside him. When I set the pen down, I felt peace wash over me. My lawyer looked at me again. Once I file this, it is final. She cannot contest it unless she proves coercion or incapacity. Do you want me to notify her? I shook my head. Let her find out later. Let her believe she still has it all, until the day she realizes she has nothing. We both sat in silence for a moment. Then I gathered my papers, shook his hand, and walked out of the office. The sun was brighter that afternoon, the air lighter. For the first time in years, my steps felt strong. I was no longer walking as a humiliated old man. I was walking as someone who had taken back control. Outside, people passed me on the street, going about their lives, not knowing that a great weight had just shifted in mine. They did not know that I had just erased a name and written a new one, that I had just decided the fate of those who thought they could laugh at me, insult me, dismiss me. But I knew, and that was enough. As I walked home, I carried no anger, only calm. My daughter thought she had the last word with her cruelty, but the truth was, I had the last word, written in legal ink, sealed with my signature. After leaving the lawyer's office, I returned home with a calmness that surprised even me. I had just erased my daughter's name from my will, and yet I did not feel anger boiling inside me. I felt something far stronger, quiet satisfaction. The papers were signed, sealed, and protected. The ink was dry, and her future, the one she assumed was secured, had shifted without her knowing. And the beauty of it all was that I would not say a single word. Silence, I realized, would be my sharpest weapon. When I saw her at the next family gathering, she was the same as always. She sat proudly at the table, laughing too loudly, bragging about her child, dropping small hints about how, one day, all this will be mine. Her words were coated in arrogance, her tone dripping with entitlement. She looked at her sister with superiority, as though she had already won the prize, as though the estate was hers by birthright. I sat there quietly, nodding occasionally, keeping my face calm. Inside, though, I smiled a secret smile. She had no idea that with one pen stroke, I had taken it all away from her. Her arrogance grew with each passing day. She spoke about renovating the house she thought she would inherit, about selling the land to pay off debts, about how her children would live comfortably thanks to me. She did not know those plans were already dust, already broken dreams. Her sister, the one she mocked, would be the one to inherit instead. And I let her believe her fantasies because it made the silence sweeter. I kept living as though nothing had changed. I visited, I ate at the table, I gave gifts to the grandchildren. I spoke little, but when I did, I chose my words carefully. Never a hint, never a clue, never a sign that her future was no longer hers. She believed she was in control, but really, I was the one holding everything. And that quiet power gave me strength. There were times when she would laugh with her husband about old people forgetting things, about how I was just waiting to pass so she could finally take charge. Her words were cruel, but I did not react. I let them slip past me because I knew something she did not. My silence was not weakness. My silence was the knife she could not see. Her sister, however, noticed something different in me. She treated me with respect, with warmth. She welcomed me into her home with open arms. She never asked for money, never demanded anything, only offered her time and her kindness. To her, I was still her father, still the man who had raised her, still worthy of love. When she hugged me, it was real. When she called me, it was genuine. And I knew then that my decision had been the right one. She, not her arrogant sister, deserved my legacy. Keeping silent was not easy. There were nights when I wanted to shout the truth, to look my older daughter in the eye and say, "You think you have won, but you have already lost everything." But I held my tongue. Silence had a weight, and that weight was building. I knew that when the day came, when she finally discovered the truth, the silence would crash over her like a storm. And that would be worth more than any argument, any confrontation. So I smiled at dinners. I handed out gifts. I played with the children. I acted like the quiet old man she thought I was. All the while, I carried the knowledge of what I had done. My silence was not empty. It was heavy. It was filled with justice. And in that silence, I found peace. She could say what she wanted. She could laugh, roll her eyes, dismiss me, even humiliate me again. None of it mattered anymore, because I had already made my choice. I had already erased her. Months passed before the silence finally broke. My daughter, the one who had humiliated me, called my lawyer about some paperwork. She had always acted like the estate was already hers, so in her arrogance, she contacted him to ask about future planning. She wanted to know what steps to take when the time came, as if she was the rightful heir already. I can imagine the moment her voice shifted, the instant my lawyer calmly told her the truth. She was not in the will anymore. Her name was gone, completely. The entire estate, every dollar, every property, every account, was written in her sister's name. I was not there to see it, but I know my daughter's face must have drained of all color. Rage, disbelief, fear. They must have all collided at once. Because for years she had lived under the false belief that my life's work was her safety net. She thought she could treat me however she pleased and still collect the reward in the end. But now, in one phone call, her empire of entitlement crumbled. She had nothing. It did not take long for her to call me. The phone rang again and again. At first, I ignored it, letting her voice fill the machine. "Dad, this must be a mistake. Call me back." Then, the next day, "Dad, why would you do this? You know I deserve it. I'm your eldest." By the third day, her tone had changed. Anger replaced desperation. "You can't do this to me. I gave you everything. You owe me." That last line made me laugh out loud, alone in my kitchen. She believed I owed her. After all the years I had carried her, she truly thought I was in her debt. When I finally answered, I did not shout. I did not explain myself with long speeches. I waited until she poured out her fury, her excuses, her pleas. And when she was out of breath, I spoke calmly. "You told me not to touch your child because I smell, remember?" There was silence on the line. I continued, "Now you will not touch my legacy. Ever." Before she could respond, I ended the call. That was the last conversation we had. Her husband tried calling too, even sending messages dripping with false politeness. But the will was legal, airtight, and final. There was nothing they could do. They visited the lawyer's office in person, demanded meetings, shouted in frustration. But the document stood firm. Her sister's name was written in black and white. Mine was the signature at the bottom. Their arrogance had no power against the law. From that day on, my daughter's voice became quieter. No more boasting at family dinners. No more remarks about when I pass. She avoided me, avoided gatherings, avoided even looking at me when we crossed paths. The humiliation she had once thrown on me now rested on her shoulders. She was the daughter who lost everything because she could not offer respect. The family whispered about it, and every whisper cut her deeper. I carried no joy in destroying her pride, but I carried no regret either. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Love had not been enough for her. Kindness had not been enough. Sacrifice had not been enough. Only silence, only action, only the cold truth of being erased could teach her the lesson she refused to learn. And I made sure that lesson would last forever. These days, my life feels quiet, but it is a quiet that brings peace instead of pain. I spend most weekends with my younger daughter, the one who still treats me with kindness, the one whose arms are always open when I arrive at her home. When I step through her door, she does not look at me with annoyance or shame. She smiles. She hugs me. She makes me feel wanted. Her children run up to me with joy, climbing onto my lap, asking me to tell them stories. And I tell them, not because I have to, but because I want to. In those small faces, I see what family is supposed to be: respect, warmth, love. I left behind the daughter who told me I smelled, and I gave everything to the one who still knew the meaning of gratitude. The house, the savings, the land, the $1.2 million estate. It is all secured in her name now. I sleep at night knowing that when I am gone, the fruits of my labor will not go to arrogance or cruelty, but to someone who values me while I am alive. That, to me, is true justice. She may not have been the eldest, but she has been the most faithful. She may not have demanded anything, but she has given me everything I wanted: respect, love, and a place at her table. When I visit her home, she does not tell me to be quiet. She asks me to share. She does not push me aside. She pulls me closer. When I reach for her children, she does not recoil. She watches with pride as I hold them in my arms. That alone is worth more than millions. That alone tells me my decision was right. My older daughter, the one who insulted me, lives now with the shadow of her mistake. She knows the truth. She knows she lost everything. Not because of an accident, not because of unfairness, but because of her own words, her own arrogance, and that truth will follow her every day of her life. Whenever she looks at her sister's home, at her sister's children, at the life that should have been hers, she will remember the moment she told me, "Don't touch my baby, you smell." That sentence was the knife that cut her off from my legacy. I do not hate her, I do not wish her harm, but I also do not forget. Respect is not owed because of blood. Respect is earned through action. She lost both, and in losing both, she lost the future she thought was hers. I spend my mornings now in peace, reading, walking, drinking tea. I am not rich in the way the world counts riches, but I am rich in dignity, rich in freedom, rich in the knowledge that I chose wisely. I gave my estate to the daughter who gave me love, not the one who gave me shame, and I would make the same choice again. Final thought: love isn't owed to blood, it's owed to respect. She lost both.